Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Hilary Mantel's short story, Sorry to Disturb. This is a very sort of claustrophobic short story. It's told from the perspective of a woman living in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, a British woman living in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, with her husband. She sort of unwillingly cultivates a friendship with this guy named Ijaz, who is a Pakistani businessman living in Jeddah as well. The story sort of opens with him ringing her doorbell, and she says in the beginning of the short story here, in those days, the doorbell didn't ring often, and if it did, I would draw back into the body of the house. Only at a persistent ring would I creep over the carpets and make my way to the front door with its spy hole. We were big on bolts and shutters, deadlocks and mortises, safety chains, and windows that were high and barred. Through the spy hole, I saw a distraught man in a crumpled silver-gray suit, 30s, Asian. So we initially start from two important pieces of information about this character. The I would draw back into the body of the house suggests that this is an individual who is in a defensive posture, let's say. But then we were big on bolts and shutters, deadlocks and mortises, safety chains, and windows that were high and barred suggests that both the wife and the husband are in a sort of defensive posture. Now, with the narrator, this seems to be more a psychological situation, right? She is depressed, anxious, possibly paranoid. It's not 100% clear. But she is clearly much more comfortable remaining by herself in her, it's really an apartment, not a house. And just writing. She doesn't particularly seem to want to be out and social, to be around other people, although she does have a couple of friends in the apartment building. The Yasmin, who I think is her next door neighbor, and Munira, who lives above them. So they live very conscripted, regimented, proscribed lives because they are women in Saudi Arabia, even though our narrator is British. I think Yasmin is Pakistani. Munira is Saudi. But all of them are, all of them are constricted by theocratic laws in Saudi Arabia about not being able to go out unescorted, not being able to go out without wearing the veil or burqa, niqab, whatever it is. Not being able to substantially interact with men who are not members of their family, etc., etc. So all of these sort of restrictions constrain the narrator, who seems to experience them much more than Munira from the little we learned about her, And we don't learn that much about Yasmin either. They're really minor figures in this. But Ijaz becomes this sort of major figure because he, after initially asking just to borrow the phone so that he can sort of call for directions to this business meeting that he's running late for, he keeps coming back. And he develops a kind of friendship with the narrator that she does not really welcome, but because he had the first, or I think second time he was there, he had talked about how the Saudis look down on him because he is Pakistani, because he's not from Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis look down on pretty much all of the foreigners except the British, and I guess Americans probably. But so the narrator doesn't feel that she can break off this friendship with Ijaz because she's afraid that he would think she was rejecting him because he is Pakistani, because he's not British or Saudi or whatever it is. And so they develop this relationship where he sort of comes over and develops almost a possessive attitude towards her. And it seems like by the latter portion, so he does at one point actually invite her and her husband over to meet his family, including his wife, his American wife, whom he's divorcing. The narrator becomes convinced that he wants to divorce his current wife and marry her, get her to divorce her husband and get the narrator to divorce her husband and marry Ijaz. She has no interest in doing this. The problem is there isn't that much she can really do about it because she's a woman in Saudi Arabia. And so she has very limited options in terms of how to respond to this situation. So this is toward the end of the short story. What it says here is, I decided that night I could no longer bear it. I did not feel I could bear even one more cup of coffee together, but I had no means of putting an end to it, and for this I excused myself, saying I had been made helpless by the society around me. I was not able to bring myself to speak to Ijaz directly. I still had no power in me to snub him. But the mere thought of him made me squirm inside with shame. And then a little bit later it goes on. Next day when my husband came home, I sat down and instigated a conversation. I asked him to write to Ijaz and ask him not to call on me any more, as I was afraid that the neighbors had noticed his visits and might draw the wrong conclusion, which, as he knew, could be dangerous to us all. My husband heard me out. You need not write much, I pleaded. He will get the point. I should be able to sort this out for myself, but I'm not allowed to. It is beyond my power, or it seems to be. I heard my own voice, jangled, grating. I was doing what I had wriggled so hard to avoid. I was sheltering behind the mores of this society, offloading the problem I had created for myself in a way that was feminine, weak, and spiteful. And so this is this interesting element here. On the one hand, it is very much a critique of a theocratic society that legally and institutionally empowers men and systematically disempowers women. At the same time, the narrator is internalizing that guilt, that sense of I should be ashamed because I have given in to a situation where I could not deal with this problem myself. So there's this sort of dual critique. On the one hand, society has created this situation where the narrator cannot break off this relationship she wants to break off, but her husband can break it off. On the other hand, as a British woman who does not come from that society, who comes from a society where, at least in principle, women have the right to be self-reliant, self-deterministic, etc., to not be able to exert that power becomes itself a source of shame, a source of defeat, almost, for the narrator. So we've got those conflicting elements. It's a complex condemnation of patriarchal social systems. And in a way, I'd say there's even a tinge of critique to Western less patriarchal. I was going to do scare quotes around non-patriarchal, less patriarchal systems. Because it is striking that one of the things the narrator is ashamed about is relying on someone else to achieve a goal that is beneficial for everyone involved. So, I don't know. That may be a stretch, but clearly there is this critique of highly regimented, hierarchical societies which limit both Ijaz's social mobility, social capital, ability to function within this society, and then very distinctly limits the ability of the narrator to function within this society because of her gender. The other thing that I find really interesting about this, the short story is told retrospectively with the help of the narrator's diary from the time. And this is a striking technique because it's not the narrator's memory that we're getting, or at least not direct memory. It's memory filtered through these diary entries, and the diary entries seem to function almost independently of the narrator, especially toward the end of the short story, when things really start to break down. For instance, we got these two lines talking about Ijaz. He doesn't reappear in the diary till March 17th. That's a really interesting sentence construction. He doesn't reappear in the diary until March 17th. That's not, he didn't return until March 17th. That's not, I don't remember him returning until March 17th. That's, the diary chronicles what happened. And the diary is this external authority that sort of takes on a life of its own. Similarly, slightly later, it says, the diary continues, but Ijaz exits from it. As though, again, the diary is not an aid to memory. It's not a chronicle of the experiences the author had, and it's an abstract representation of them. Instead, the diary is this sort of authoritative document. Almost like almost like a holy text in a way. The diary says, the diary recounts, the diary does this, as though it is itself the source of information, as opposed to a repository.